Welcome to the TMRN Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Jules, and today is the 19th of March 2011, the day of the supermoon. We have well-known researcher and former undercover person from the FBI, Stan Deyo. Stan's website is standeyo.com. Hi Stan, welcome.
Hi guys, glad to be here. Jules, the rest of you.
Hi, thank you for joining us. The Webbot Forum administrator is Fox, and today he will be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us tonight. They include Webbot moderators Mulder, Onkbubby, and members Bubbly Bugger, Lolly, Athena, Gemini 111, and Groundrod. This video will be available on YouTube for free on the Webbot Forum channel. The website is webbotforum.com. Stan, many of the Roundtable members have followed your work for many years, and most have listened to your interviews, in particular over the last 6 months, so you know you don't have to try to explain answers in layman's terms to us. However, by all means, let it all out. So with that said, Stan, you ready to go?
I am, Jules, and if I do use $50 words, as Holly calls them, just tell me you need change. I'll bring it down a notch.
Yeah, well, the currency has gone down. So, okay. Starting with Earth changes and current events, our first question comes from Unkbubby.
Hi, Stan.
Hi.
The sun is acting strangely. There are mass animal deaths, magnetic anomalies, Japanese quake and tsunami and other earthquakes, volcanoes, and extreme weather. Have we reached the stage of Earth changes? Also, with your background in earthquake predictions, what do you think about the future of the New Madrid Fault in a worst-case scenario?
Well, now, the New Madrid is one of about 3 or 4 different areas that I'm keeping an eye on the planet. In the United States, for our American listeners, the New Madrid fault line, the Juan de Fuca fault line, which is about 600 miles long from Vancouver Island all the way down to northern California, and the Yellowstone Park in the northwest sector. These 3 areas are of growing concern to me. I've been monitoring helicorders or helical earthquake recorders at the University of Utah, which are monitoring Yellowstone. And Yellowstone seems to be tied directly to the Japanese quake. When the Japanese quake occurred, there were 2 monitors there in Yellowstone that just went berserk, and then they stabilized. And then yesterday and the day before, I saw harmonic tremors that were just absolutely swamping 2 or 3 even of the helicorders there. Now, this affects New Madrid as well. New Madrid is a very old fault line, but it has tributaries to it running through Arkansas and through all the way even over to Oklahoma. The main tributary I'm looking at the moment is called the Guy Fault, the Guy fault, which is near the town of Guy in Arkansas. That fault line has been exhibiting a few small quakes, nothing to write home about in general, but coupled with the other activities I'm seeing on the West Coast and at Yellowstone, and coupled with the test responses that the government wants to do in 8 states, as far as earthquake and emergency preparedness, and with the FEMA order for a lot of body bags, and with the FEMA order in January for a lot of meals to handle hundreds of millions of meals. All of these things do add up to a government trying to subtly warn us that either the New Madrid is going to be the major disaster area or the gathering or escape area for those from the West escaping from what happens at Yellowstone. One of the 2 scenarios do present themselves. And I must say, if I were in charge of the government myself, I would be hard-pressed to just come out officially and say, oh, excuse me, look, I think that the end of the United States is at hand. Basically, we're going to get wiped out. And, so everybody kiss your backside goodbye. I would be hard-pressed to do that because it would bring anarchy. And if I was wrong, even as a government, and saying that such and such an event's going to happen at such and such a time, and it didn't, you see, I would cause such social unrest and anarchy in certain places that it would be counterproductive. So that's what I think about New Madrid at the moment. Watch it closely, get prepared, but I don't know whether the disaster is going to be there or whether that's going to be a staging area for the survivors of what hits further west. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Stan.
All righty.
Mulder, you have a question for Stan.
Okay, well, You may have already partially answered my question with the last one, but I'll go ahead anyway.
All right.
Do you have any reason to believe that the Cascadia Fault may be getting ready to snap here? And if so, do you have any clue as to a timeline when that might happen?
Well, now, yes. The short answer is yes. I think it is going to release, and I think we'll probably release in stages. The Cascadia Fault is part of that 600-mile-long fault I was telling you about that runs from Vancouver all the way down to northern California. And it does go far enough into northern California to actually trigger the top end of the San Andreas Fault and all the related faults down within California to the west of the mountains there. The reason I'm watching that area for a very, like an almost imminent release is a couple things. First of all, you've heard about the effects, the tidal effects of the moon at its perigee, or its closest point to the Earth, and that is coming this weekend, right now, in fact. And this causes like a wave or a pimple to raise up on the surface of the Earth as the moon and the Earth pass each other during this close proximity of the moon. Now, the Cascadia Fault, the Juan de Fuca Plate, leads into that. That area is under such stress, it's bent almost on the coast side of it, on the land side of it, into like an inchworm type bend up. And that pressure has been building for over 55 years. Every other major zone on the Ring of Fire, or the Arc of Fire around the Pacific, and even into Sumatra, all the other big pressure areas in those plate boundaries have released. This one is overdue. It's the only one left that's got such huge pressure buildup that we know of on the Pacific Arc. Now, Chile had a big quake, a month and a half ago, and it's had, aftershocks of maybe 800, 900, maybe 1,000 of significant size. Japan has one, and of course the tsunami and the other things that are still going. Now, these are all located on the Arc of Fire. I'm looking very closely at what happens now with Cascadia. I think that we'll see a major quake there, a Richter 9 or better, right between Oregon and Washington. And after that, or coincident with that, within a few days, I think we'll see something down in New Guinea. These are in a line that's at right angles between the quakes in Chile and the quakes, or the big quake and the aftershocks in Japan. So because of what I think is causing this increase in earthquakes and volcanoes, I think we're going to see not only these, but a lot of other significant quakes throughout the world, particularly in the Middle East, in areas where we've not seen them very recently, because the planet itself is, I think, is starting, in fact, a catastrophic expansion in its diameter, which has occurred before. Scientific data does show that the Earth is now 20 to 25% larger in diameter than it was when all the continents were together back when it was, Pangea or Gondwana land. These things all tell me that we need to watch and prepare for some severe earthquakes, severe tsunamis, severe volcanoes and ash falls, among other things that are attendant with that in case of nuclear reactors releasing stuff into the air as well into our food chain. How's that for an answer?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Stan. Just to follow up on that, I'm not sure if you follow or you've read some of Cliff's reports, but a while back he had a forecast where there would be such a big earthquake that bridges and roads and dams for 1,000 miles radius would collapse. I mean, is that something that the 9 at Cascadia or even New Madrid could cause, possibly?
Well, because it possibly. It would take a series of events to be the perfect storm for the earthquake to do that. But certainly if the Cascadia event triggers the San Andreas and the attendant little faults all along there, that could then trigger, say, the Yellowstone eruption, and that could then trigger the New Madrid thing. What I've just received in the email about 10 minutes ago from someone watching the news is that there's a 100-mile-long oil slick in the Gulf right now out near where the oil spill occurred at that the Horizon the site where they were drilling a few months back, and we had a great oil leak. So something else is now leaking there. And the fault line of New Madrid runs right on down through Louisiana and down into the Gulf of Mexico underneath all that sediment. I'm concerned that, yes, something like that could happen and trigger others that are ready to happen. Not so much that the moon itself would supply all the energy for the earthquake, but it would be a trigger for pressures that have been building for several decades. That area in the Gulf of Mexico is where the Chicxulub meteor impact occurred back in ancient times, and it shoved parts of what was the Gulf of Mexico, or what was just a landmass at that time. It shoved parts of it up into Texas, Oklahoma, and even further north, up into Kansas and over toward the New Madrid Fault on the right. And that crack that leads all the way up to the Great Lakes connects right down to that impact zone. So there are a lot of factors to consider here, but my gut feeling is that we're about to see some horrific times in the next few months, maybe up to 10 years worth, off and on, depending on how the sun acts and various other factors with the moon.
Thank you, Stan. And there was just a very aggressive filament that just burst in the last 8 hours, so hopefully that doesn't take effect. My next question is from myself, Stan. I reread the dream and warnings you received from a female Maori Indian elder from New Zealand. I recall she outlined an event where a channel had been worked on for many years and was not yet complete, and where thousands of what looked like logs of timber would come crashing down, killing thousands. And when this occurred, it would be a sign to her people the earth changes were about to happen. Could this story have been misinterpreted as the Three Gorges Dam and in fact have been the Japanese tsunami, earthquake, and the nuclear meltdown rods occurring now?
Well, I can't speak for the Maori elder, but I'm pretty certain what she said described an event with a tributary or a dam itself breaking. And I don't think that we can interpret the Japanese event as what she was talking about, because she said that whatever this event is, that there would be an attendant scandal because of the timbers used in this whatever breaks were substandard timbers put in place by the people who took money from the government to build it and used substandard stuff and pocketed the difference in, as personal gain. So I haven't seen any evidence of that. I don't see any evidence of log failures or whatever. So I don't think that these two events are relating to what she is forecasting or prophesying for her people there in New Zealand.
Okay, thank you. In the dream, she also stated that Lake Taupo would blow. Living in Australia, how big a blow would it be? Apparently, the Taupo volcano has a volcanic explosivity index of 7, with its last eruption in 180 AD. By comparison, the Krakatoa eruption in 1883 is rated a 6, and Yellowstone is rated an 8. What type of devastation are you expecting from Taupo eruption, particularly for Australia and New Zealand?
Well, I think the whole world will suffer when that one goes. The Taupo caldera is now Lake Taupo, which is the water kind of sitting like a cork on the top of the caldera beneath. There are 3 volcanoes that lead into the caldera now, Ruapeu, Nuraheu, and I forget the other one's name, Taronga, I think, but all 3 of them are connected to that. Now, there's been funding since we were there and warned the New Zealand government. Holly and I were down there and we warned them about this. They hadn't put enough funding into the GNS, which is the New Zealand equivalent of USGS. They hadn't put enough money in there for them to put sensors for temperature and various other factors, water level changes in the lake and tributaries to it. Since, I was asked by the Department of Tourism New Zealand never to come back because of what I said publicly there on Art Bell's show, which was played down there. But they did give them a huge grant, which allowed them to rent the German Yellow Submarine to go down there and start mapping and data logging a lot of stuff, temperatures and fissures down in the bottom of the Taupo caldera. Now, when it goes, what I think will happen from what I saw and what the Maori, Kahuna, the prophecy woman said, was that the bottom of the lake, the top of the caldera, will fracture, and there will be water flow down into the fissures, and it will be hot, and it'll get hot overnight, so hot that it'll boil your feet if you're walking on the shores or in the water of Taupo. And that's just before the whole thing collapses, and that huge amount of water in Lake Taupo drops down into a magma bed. And that will cause a tremendous steam explosion and eruption when it happens, and it'll throw boulders the size of cars clear up, toward Rotorua and up into the northern parts of North Island. Now, there have been a number of other people with dream visions of the same thing in New Zealand over the years since I first made the announcement, seeing the same thing. The last time that it erupted fully in 180 to 187 AD, it created a blanket of ash around the entire planet. And understand, New Zealand's in the southern hemisphere. It created an ash blanket that the Chinese astronomers in the northern hemisphere recorded as 3 days of darkness from the ash fall from it. It is huge. So is it going to affect Australia? Yeah. The eastern side of Australia may well get a tsunami or several waves in that tsunami period from the eruption. And a lot of of course, the North Island, New Zealand, is just going to be devastated. We're advising people that are watching this who live there to move, if there's any warning of this, like the Maori woman said, to move up into that peninsula which juts up toward the equator for safety, and to the highest ground you can get there during the time of the tsunami-type waves that will be occurring after the eruption. There are just so many attendant problems with something like that it's hard to tell people the safe place, but there are places that are less likely to wipe you out. So yes, Australia will be bothered, South America will be bothered, North America will be bothered, all of Europe, China, Russia, everybody will get their share of it when that one goes. And, between that and Yellowstone, we've got two big problems sitting there.
Thanks, Stan. Definitely the Great Dividing Range is probably the place to be. Lolly, you have a question for Stan?
Yes. Hi, Stan. I'm
Hi.
Canadian. And I'd like to know, in addition to a potential catastrophic release of the Juan de Fuca plate on the west coast, can you tell us anything regarding possibilities for major earth movements in Canada? And also, could you comment on how a major event in the New Madrid area might destabilize or otherwise affect the eastern part of Canada?
Well, Lolly, look, I must apologize. I haven't studied Canada as much as you should have in relation to the earthquakes, because in the past, the way I forecast quakes was looking at coastal boundaries to water and temperature changes there that would reflect an imminent seismic release. So I can't tell you what it would do on the east coast of Canada, or other than the damage that would come into the Vancouver area from the quake itself along the Cascades and from the tidal wave. I can't tell you much more than that. I'm sorry.
That's fine, thanks. Well, I'm snuggled up here next to the Rocky Mountains in the foothills, and so Cliff has written that he believes the significant mountain-forming period of Earth's expansion has concluded, and that we're more likely to continue to see rifts and sinkholes as Earth grows going forward from Neil Adams' expansion model. Does your model or data suggest that we still may see significant upthrust events, mountain forming? And if so, what would account for that at this point?
I think, I've talked to Neil Adams and a number of others, and also researched work like for H.G. Owen's work on the Atlas of Continental Expansion. I think I agree that the mountain building processes are pretty much finished at this point, and that what we're going to see is stretching of the thinner parts, which is under oceans or on ocean borders to existing tectonic plates. Where you get those mountain building processes is where these land masses that are above water collide. And in the North Atlantic, right on down into the southern part of the Atlantic, you have that ridge there. But I think that was a kind of an aftermath of the last major expansion period, and there was kind of magma build up there over a period of time, which did build those. But as far as catastrophic things, I think we're going to see that the lower elevations will receive pulls or stretches and rips or tears, as opposed to collisions to build mountains.
Thanks very much, Stan.
Mm-hmm.
Groundrock, you had a question for Stan?
Yeah, hi, Stan. Forgive my voice, just getting over a cold here.
Hey, let me tell you what, Groundrod, I've been about 8 days with this stupid flu, and I'm sitting here with lemon and honey and trying to keep my voice working too, so I sympathize.
Thank you. I wish I'd made my questions shorter. Here we go. Stan, we here on the forum monitor and share what solar data we're able to gather from a multitude of sources. Many of us experienced surprise and amazement at the March 9th X-class flare happened, as it happened. The second in only a month, and then to reach a level that didn't exist before 2000. However, this particular flare, unlike the one in February, had a substantial proton event component, and a strong associated geomagnetic storm ensued. Just as the Earth was experiencing a strong pull southward, the geomagnetometer was fighting its way back northward when the horror of what has become known as the Japanese 9-point earthquake hit. Perhaps from reading too much of your work and what little is known publicly about T.T. Brown's anti-gravitic research, what seemed to be happening while watching the 10 megaelectron volt proton levels was a perfect example of a sawtooth-shaped waveform, similar to the pulse DC component needed to charge an asymmetrical capacitor and produce an antigravitic response. Can you confirm or dismiss any of these wild-eyed speculations? Perhaps share with us some of your solar observations at the time and their interpretation. Thank you.
All right, Ground Rod. Good that you got through that without kind of losing your voice entirely. Look, I've been working for probably 6 to 7 months on a new paper, part 2 of my series on gravity, electricity, and magnetism, the real nature of it in terms of inertia or Newtonian mechanics rather than the relativistic equations. What I have found is there are 2 types of gravity, and NASA has confirmed this in that with Pioneer 10 and 11, which were going to the outer reaches, or are at the outer reaches of our solar system, out around 75 AUs from the sun, these 2 probes started to pull back as though some weaker force they hadn't predicted was pulling them back toward the sun. Now, my new model for gravity does support the fact that atoms will line up and that their spins will, in the fluid of space, ether space, will create a low pressure zone, which we normally call gravity, or the gravitational constant of a planet. But those atoms, all of our atoms on the Earth and in any other planet or star or galaxy, all of these spinning things that are gathered together to form a sphere or a flattened spheroid or a disk, all of these things are organized by a weaker but larger field that spins them into the center of the whole operation. It's like if you take a glass of water that you can, clear glass of water, and you can put some fine iron filings in it and some fine sand grains in it with water and stir the glass up. Initially, there will be a chaos, a maelstrom of all these particles and water spinning around. Now, the water is going to be like the invisible ether space, that fine structure that I believe is like a fluid that permeates all of the universe that we can detect at the moment. The sand and the iron filings are like different types of matter, different densities. And if you'll stir that and let it settle down, you'll see in the middle of that glass at the bottom, first the iron filings form a little TP or cone shape, and then on top of that come the lighter, less dense sand grains, and they form this kind of conic shape down there. Now, they have their own gravitational force from the atoms in the sand and the iron filings, but there is a weaker force which lines them up. And understand, atoms, when they spin, and they all spin, they spin at better than 50 million times a second. And if you can imagine a gyroscope spinning at 50 million RPS, you're looking at something that's mighty and doesn't want to change its axis of rotation easily. So it is organized by this much greater spinning field, like if you're looking at a galaxy, at the center of it, things seem to be flowing into that center but not going anywhere. In essence, they are. It's a folded sphere with voids inside of it, and in the very center of a galaxy, it's a supermassive black hole, which is not exactly spherical, but it's more like a donut or an oblique spheroid. But all of these things indicate that gravity has two components, the containment or organizing field, that weaker one, and then the sum of all the atoms within that. Now, our sun has the equivalent in our solar system. It has the organizing field which forms the orbits of the planets, and then the sun itself has its own atoms all lined up. All their spin axes are lined up in a particular direction toward the center of the sun. When you upset this balance, whether magnetically or electrostatically or by magnetic ropes flipping in the sun, it sends shock waves out that you don't even see throughout the organizing or containment field throughout the entire solar system. So I am concerned, certainly, that this will affect Earth's gravity and also the stability of the gravity of all the planets, probably as far as the Kuiper Belt, at around what is that, around 45, I think, or where does it start? 45 to 50 AUs, I think, out there, something like that. So the anti-gravity type potential you're talking about, basically I look at not as anti-gravity, but a disturbance in the organizing field, which may even cause our atoms here on the Earth, everything, to deviate from their normal stable position with their spin axes perpendicular to the surface of the Earth, inside and out. Gravity, as we describe it now, does, I'm pretty sure, invert or reverse. If you drill down in the Earth toward the center, it will, a few hundred miles down, it will invert and be backwards, negative up toward the surface. There will be a void, and then another positive gravitational thing down near the core. But this is something that I'll explain later in my paper. And in fact, actually, if you can go to my website there, to standeyo.com, for today's forum, I've got a thing that says Show Images. And if you click on that, it'll give you some pictures that I've taken out of the paper I'm writing, which show the containment field and what I'm talking about and how it does affect gravity and the particles that are in that gravitational field, and hence the gravity of a planet or moon or star or galaxy, whatever. And I've also got links to Neil Adams' site there too, because I really think his illustrations or his animations of real data do show what we're talking about, the expansion and catastrophic expansion of planets and stars. Did I get off track, or did I get all that?
No, thank you, Stan. Neil Adams sure does have something that gives one pause. Thank you.
Thanks, Granrod. Stan, staying on to the sun, as you are aware, the Hopi have a prophecy of the end of the fourth world destroyed by a purge of fire. Many of us are very familiar with your years of work on the Hopi and the map you drew of the US of A. If we are indeed in the Earth changes period, is there anything else you have not yet said on air that the Hopi elders have told you secretly about the end of the fourth world? Perhaps now is a good time to state it.
No, I think I have imparted everything that they gave to us. Certainly a lot of what they're talking about as far as the fire from the sun scorching the earth is in biblical prophecy in the book of Revelation. So I believe that's the important issue, is that there will be some kind of a solar event that will cook the surface of the planet, probably the side of the planet that's facing the sun when it hits. I don't know whether it'll be a proton event as opposed to electromagnetic event, but if our ozone layer is weakened, if our magnetic field weakens on the planet and even inverts or is inverting when this happens, it will shield us, we'll lose our shield that it normally shields us with, and certain ultraviolet frequencies will be allowed to penetrate the earth, and certainly will cause damage to living tissue, like immediate pin-pricking pain in the skin and blisters. But secondary to that, I think we might see fires erupt, perhaps with other factors like the proton storm may attend it. It may cause shorts in power lines, which start fires. There may be something else totally different coming from the sun, like a burning mass. I don't know that I've ever seen such a thing that would hit the planet. Mainly it's only smaller particles that hit, 2 or 3 days after the event. But we are watching the sun. It is acting unusually. And the Hopi have said, many times, we're going underground. We're going to build mud igloos, kivas they call them, underneath the floor of the desert where they live, to stay there for 2 or 3 weeks while this tremendous heat passes and the fires pass. They will not be in an area themselves, they or the Navajo, where there's a great risk of burning trees or grass. It's desert. We gave them the worst land in America to live on, and in this case, it's going to be their best defense. Now, the rest of the United States and the world, where we have trees and grass that are going to catch fire from this, we're going to have a problem. I don't know. I mean, the Bible does say that men in this time will gnash their teeth in pain and will cry for the rocks to fall and hide them from the face of the Almighty, and also that they look for caves to hide in. This does indicate very strongly that this age, this fourth age, will end in fire rather than flood by water. It will be a severe fire event. And the only thing I can think of, not nuclear war, is the sun itself, which is a major engine for energy in the solar system. The sun itself will contribute to this heating of the planet at that time. Now, there's other things that they've talked about, but I've talked about them on other shows, as far as the flooding that will occur in Arizona, in northern Arizona. The Hopi mesas, there's 3 of them above about 5,280 feet in the desert there, close to the Grand Canyon. They told us that they would go by canoe between the mesas before this is over. Now, either we have to have a sea level rise of over a mile to bring that prophecy to pass, or the Hopi landmass has to sink down when the Cascadia and San Andreas faults release and allow the coastline to fracture and drop down close to sea level. I think that's more likely than a sea level rise of a mile. There's also the problem which occurred back at the time of the flood, the biblical flood. And most people think, it rained 40 days and 40 nights and flooded the earth, and that was it. But if you read in the original Hebrew, there was about 100 days worth of high temperature water being shot up through jets, which they call fountains of the deep in English, from all over the oceans, in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. And these shot hot, superheated water up from the bottom of the seafloor. We now know that there is a layer of water down about 5 to 15 miles deep, depending on where you are on the planet. It's thinner, it's closer under oceans and deeper under mountains. And this is called the Moho discontinuity. And it's got salt water in it, about 3.3 times the density of water. And it's hot. And if you imagine the core of the planet expanding for whatever reason, it puts pressure on that layer, that shell of water under the surface of the earth. And it's like hypodermic syringes. It shoots it out. So we may have additional water, hot water, steamy water, and we may also have coastline subsidences or just dropping into the ocean because of this expansion and the earthquakes that are going to attend it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, all right.
Go ahead. Go. Now keep going, Sam.
All right, well, and the other thing is, now the Hopi said that during all these changes, there will be civil war in the United States from various factions where the non-people, the non-Indian, will fight amongst each other. And while they're fighting, there will be a foreign invasion from the Middle East and from the Far East, Europe, not Europe, but Russia and China. And that the United States will, in essence, be invaded. And there will be a terrible destruction of land and property to the point where it's not even livable anymore. And survivors from that invasion will, American survivors, will gather together in little bands, and a number of them will reach the Hopi and the Navajo who live close to them, and then will form a new band of man, a new tribe of man, and move up into the Four Corners region, into the southern part of Colorado, and possibly part of it up into Utah. So that will occur after the flooding has occurred in northern Arizona. There are stages to these things. I'm just trying to remember what else they said. Let's see, there's that. Yeah, I think that's the major gist of what they told us at the time.
Okay, thank you, Stan. So with that, a single event from the sun that scorches 1/3 of the Earth, or continuous bombardment of multiple CMEs hitting the Earth over a period of time. Also, how long do you think the Hopi are expecting to stay covered from the sun in their kivas or underground houses?
Well, the hope he did say 2 to 3 weeks. Obviously, it'll be until it's cool enough to get out. One of the things that they said that was interesting about the preparation they're making inside these kivas, these mud kivas, is in addition to water, they're putting clay pots filled with wood ash from pine-type trees and scrub oak that they've burned to a fine ash, and they've put in that ash, they've put beans and corn. Now, the ash will keep the beans and corn preserved for up to 30 years. They've got some that old they've been keeping. I think it's from the tars that's in the ash that helps to keep bacteria out of it and preserve it. But they're going to just empty that out into a bowl and swish some water around it and wash the ash off and then cook it. But it's just one of the ways they're doing. So they've allowed for longer than 2 or 3 weeks, but I don't think they'll need it.
Okay. Also, I'm not sure if you're familiar with a researcher called Patrick Gerrell. He's got a mega sunspot cycle theory, which is obviously expecting the sun to expend a lot of energy over the next couple of years. But the different thing about Patrick is that he's actually got a code which he sees certain periods of time where the actual sun would unwind its, and some of the periods include April 19th, July 15th, and then October 11th of this year. So at least that provides some sort of timing. Have you done any research on Patrick, and what do you think of his theories?
Patrick is he's the Zeitgeist movement. Is that the one?
No, he's a 2012 guy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that. Well, maybe not. Maybe he's on the Zeitgeist forum. I forget now. But, yeah, I've heard brief comments on it. I've not studied his work in detail. But I agree that we're going to see a period of massive change in the sun itself right now. There are solar plumes, magnetic plumes, fountains occurring at the northern and southern poles of the sun now then, newly discovered type plumes, and more intense than would be expected. These things, I think, do indicate that the sun itself may be going to go through an expansion phase, and a change of the nuclear chemistry has occurred as long as we've been able to observe it. So if he's saying that the cycles, whether they add together or however he does it, are coming up to a point of change, then I guess we're arriving at the same conclusion from different aspects.
Okay, thank you, Stan. Mulder, you have a question for Stan?
Yes. Since you believe in the expanded Earth model, may I ask what you think the mechanism is for this expansion and where you believe all of the additional matter comes from?
Well, actually, that's a good question, and I don't believe that we have any additional matter for the expansion. One of the problems that has been brought up by the antagonist to the hollow Earth or expanding Earth theory has been that, there's a certain gravitational constant for the planet, which means you have to have a certain density of mass, and they have made the assumption that if the Earth is solid, and if we have certain areas of seismic refractivity or reflectivity underneath the surface at different radii, that the Earth is composed of layers of different elements of different densities, like in the glass of water where the sand is on the outside because it's lighter density than the iron filings on the inside. They have not allowed for voids. Now, in the new gravitational model that I'm putting into this next paper, what happens is that there's every planet, star, galaxy, etc., has this organizing spinning field that spins so densely as it gets toward the center where all the atoms are compacting that it's organizing, that at the polar regions of the object, the field meets itself and bends inward and forms a negative or like a concave surface to the inside of the planet, forming a void between that level and the next level down in the core or levels beneath that. With the Earth, the mass is not going to change. It's only going to be the spacing of that void, the extent of that void, and the surface of the Earth will get skinnier. The mantle part will get skinnier, and I don't know whether that's going to be like 600 or 700, 800 miles, it gets down to 500. I haven't done those calculations yet, but I have done the calculations that show that we can have a massive void in between the outer core of the outer mantle of the planet and the inner core. If the inner core is made of cadmium and other heavy elements, then it would give us the same gravitational mass with a void. You don't have to have a continuous matter presence down there. It's these folded fields that spin inside the planet and form that void, and then form the bend back on themselves and form the spinning sphere in the middle of the core, and eventually that has to invert. It has a long period inversion phase, and you have seen something like this in that glass of water. It's a great example. If you stir that glass of water and then let go of it and watch it slow down and slow down, the vortex, or the tornado type shape in the middle of it, at the very tip at the bottom, you'll notice that tip, as it gets slower and slower, starts to raise up and down, up and down. It's going through changes in phase, and it's strong then weak, strong then weak. And in the case of planets, in our planet, I think it means is that the inner core, the really hot molten core, has spin to it and will change that spin to conserve momentum. It's like winding up a spring that has to unwind back the other way. And this may explain why we've been having 10,000-year period changes to the magnetic field where it inverts, or north and south pole invert. It's the core down there doing it. I'm waving my hands a lot trying to explain this, and you can't see me, but that's why I'm doing animations in the paper I'm writing. If you look at the hollow Earth cross-section I've got in the images page, it's down about, 4 rows down the middle. You'll see the blue containment wave, the green surface of the Earth, and the red core inside that. And these are formed by these waves that fold back on themselves and form that void. Now, where were we going with that? I forgot. What was the original question?
I was just asking what the mechanism was for
okay. All right. Well, that's answered that. That's the best I can answer because I can't, show you right now other than what's on the images there. If you click on them, you'll get an expanded view on that website. You can see the holes that appear and the layers. And there can be more than one layer inside a planet or star or whatever. I'm really anxious to get this thing finished and released because I can address the problem of the supermassive black holes and the loss of data that they say, occurs under the existing relativistic theories. And I think it will make a lot of people happy. It'll let both sides of the argument of the TOE, the theory of everything, come together with a new, concise model that fits everything. I think Stephen Hawking will like it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Stan. I'll be looking forward to reading your paper.
All right.
Thanks, Stan. I don't think Stephen will like it, by the way. Okay, the next question is from Lolly.
Stan, you've suggested in previous interviews that governments have been working to release pressure along some fault lines. Do you have any reason to believe that what occurred in the Gulf of Mexico was just such an operation? And do you have any more information on what you think might be going on there now in the Gulf?
I don't have any information that tells me they were trying to release pressure. They could have been. I've certainly seen them do it when I was down in Australia on the western coast there. I was handed a classified document at the time, communication from the United States through our defense areas there, which showed that Perth, Australia, was subject to about an 8-point-something plus earthquake if they didn't relieve stress north of it along a fault line that was there at the time. So what they did is they sent a roving or mobile teams of geologists with explosives, and they blasted pressure areas that were tributary, smaller fault lines leading into that. And over a period of several weeks, they relieved enough stress that the major earthquake did not wipe out the city of Perth. There were some smaller quakes, but nothing to worry anybody. Now, New Madrid is another thing. It does go down into the Gulf of Mexico under the sediment basin there. If they were blasting and trying to relieve it, I think we would have seen some seismic detection of it, because we're talking about things that might have been a 1.5 to 2 point Richter if they were making significant blasts in that area. It would have been dangerous, and I don't think, from the geologists I've talked to with BP, I've talked with part of the cleanup team, they're more concerned with keeping that area quiet and stable in the Gulf than they are trying to relieve pressure of the New Madrid. Because of 100 years of oil extraction and gas extraction, and not every well backflooding with seawater to fill the voids they left after they took the oil and gas out, it has left a very porous and in some cases cavernous substructure under the Gulf of Mexico, which one day, if it gets a good shake, will collapse and produce tsunamis all around the Gulf of Mexico coastlines everywhere. So I don't think that they're trying to relieve any stress there at the moment. They're probably crossing their fingers and hoping this current leak, which has occurred only in the last 16 hours. They've discovered it's been out there for 2 or 3 days. They're hoping that leak is something that is transient and not a sign of a fracture in the subformations. There is pressure down there, and it did get compromised when when the horizon exploded. So, no, I don't think so. I've looked at Arkansas and at Oklahoma, and I thought, okay, they're saying that they're drilling for gas. If you look at the earthquakes, they're widespread across Greenbrier, where these small quakes have been recorded. And they might have been trying to relieve stress along the Guy Fault that way. Certainly, there's small earthquakes, which is really small earthquakes, but a lot of them, which does make me think that could be a pattern of stress relief. But other than that, I've not seen anything that indicates to me that they're doing stress relief anywhere else.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you. I'm always ever hopeful that people, a lot of us will make it through to the other side in terms of the Earth changes. At what point in the cycle do you expect the Earth changes to stabilize? Is that dependent on Planet X returning on its path away from us? What would account for return to stabilization for the Earth in your theory? Can you speculate at all?
Well, a couple of things. On Planet X, I'm still trying to get confirmation of its existence, at least close to the Earth, or where we can see it. I've not been able, to my satisfaction, get any reports that have seen it or detected it in the civilian complex. I do know, in this new gravitational theory that I put together, my theory has it's an algebraic formula progression, which does predict the exact orbits, the mean orbits of every planet in our solar system, plus 6 orbits that aren't filled. And one of those orbits, one predicted exactly mathematically, is at 250 AUs from the sun. That's its mean orbit. And the orbital time for a planet occupying that mean orbit would be 3,600 years, plus or minus 12 years. Now, that's very close to what Sitchin's figures show, and I don't mean to just support everything Sitchin says, but there is an orbit there, and if there is a planet there, it could very well be eccentric like Pluto is, and have an inclined orbit to the ecliptic that's greater than 23, 24, 25 degrees, and when it comes in close around the sun, it could dive into our orbital system somewhere around Mars, the asteroid belt, somewhere in that area, go around the sun and come back out through the same belt, and the whole transit time would only be 11 years, roughly figured on calculations I've got at the moment. Now, that may be in progress now, but I haven't seen it. So Planet X, I think, in my opinion, is kind of off the table as far as the major drama at the moment to Earth's geophysical changes. I could be way off. I mean, as I say, I'm having astronomer friends in the Southern Hemisphere looking for it. And if it is there and it does come into play, its orbit, its containment orbit, the thing that organizes the atoms of Planet X, could cause ripples in Earth's orbit, Mars, Venus, Mercury, all of us, even the asteroid belt. And it could release things up from a stable orbit they're in now, or fairly stable in the asteroid belt, for instance, that become Earth-threatening near-Earth objects that could cause massive damage to the planet when they hit. These changes, I think, we're going to see an end to over the next 10 to 15 years. The major part of them, I think, will pass once we get through this next period, finish this solar cycle and a couple of other factors, and I think that we'll see it start to stabilize again. And the reason I say that is if there is a rogue planet out there, which NASA's been looking for, because there's something perturbing, we've known it for years, perturbing the orbit of Neptune and Uranus. It's a little bobble in their orbit. There's something out there doing that. And if it is moving, and it is moving in close to the Earth in a long period, very elliptical orbiting, then that could contribute to all this, but it can only contribute about 11 years maximum, in my opinion, because that's the only time it will be close enough to kind of directly disturb the gravitational planet, this planet, the moon, Mercury, Venus, all that, as it passes through. So that's why I'm saying 10 to 15 years, and things should stabilize again.
Thanks, Stan.
All right.
Athena, you have a question for Stan.
Yes, Stan. Since its discovery in December 2010, more observers and amateur astronomers are now beginning to theorize that comet Elenin may in fact be our dreaded brown dwarf star, or one of its planets. The star that goes by many names, Wormwood, the Destroyer, Planet X. Elenin does not move as a comet would. Rather, its movements seem rather planetary, and its alignments with the Earth and our Sun over the past 12 months have coincidentally accompanied some of the more massive earthquakes that we have experienced during this time frame. What's your take on Elenin? Do you really believe that it is actually a comet?
Well, as far as orbits of things, especially eccentric orbits in our solar system, you have several types of orbits that they describe, and the astronomers and physicists will look at a planet's position, take readings over several days, months, years to calculate the orbit. They'll calculate whether it's a parabolic orbit, a hyperbolic orbit, an elliptical orbit, and if what is supposed to be a comet, Elenin, is behaving not like we thought it would as far as a comet, because they've calculated its orbit as more planetary or elliptical, almost semicircular, but elliptical in this case, then it could be the cause of the problems that we're anticipating. I am aware of the coincident alignments between the Sun, the Earth, and its position in the past 3 or 4 years, and what is coming. It's future alignments, all within that 10 to 15 year period now. So, yes, I think it bears watching. I think that officially, behind the scenes, they may already have calculated its orbit, gotten enough readings to know exactly what its orbit is. And the fact that it's call it a comet instead of a planet, or a rogue moon to a brown dwarf or whatever, is being hidden simply because it is easier for people to deal with a comet and not be panicked. They can see it in the skies, they can, register it and whatever, and deal with it. The majority of stars we've seen out in the galaxy, or in fact in the universe, the majority of stars are binary stars. It would be unusual if our Sun, in other words, didn't have a binary star out there somewhere out beyond the Oort cloud that we're mutually orbiting. The containment field theory that I've got does allow for that quite happily, and this Elenin may be connected to that. I just think it bears close watch. At this point, I think I don't have enough information personally to say one way or the other whether it is a comet or whether it is a moon or a planet orbiting a brown dwarf. I certainly think we should see evidence of a brown dwarf's gravitational field acting on the Sun fairly quickly if it's that close, though.
Stan, while some acknowledge that a brown dwarf star could theoretically be in our cosmic neighborhood and could theoretically pose difficulties for Earth at some point in the future, the general consensus seems to be that if such an object were currently approaching our inner solar system, let's say 6 AUs or less from Earth, it would be observable by most, if not all, astronomers at this point. Can you please address the issue of a brown dwarf's visibility and tell us whether you believe that an object of this nature would unquestionably be visible by now if it were relatively near Earth? Thank you.
I don't think it would be unquestionably visible if it were coming in like that. A brown dwarf, depending upon the stage of its nuclear chemistry, would be visible in the infrared radiation bands, and could possibly be seen and detected way out there by an infrared telescope, which don't grow on trees for amateur astronomers, for sure. The other effects, not visual effects, but the perturbation effects in orbits of the inner planets would also be visible, detectable, as opposed to the brown dwarf star itself, the wake of it, if you wish, in the orbits and gravitational fields of the inner planets and the sun itself. Now, 6 AUs is a fairly significant distance, but certainly if it got any closer than that, you would start to see matter streamers kind of ripping off of our sun toward the brown dwarf, or vice versa, whatever, probably sun toward the brown dwarf. That would be visible. So its albedo, its reflective index, it depends on a number of things, the stages of its reaction. So I think that something that massive would be detectable either visually or gravitational perturbation-wise in orbits of inner planets. That's the best I can answer that question. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Stan. Party Pop, did you have another question?
There has been a spate of second sun sightings all over the world in the past month, some of which have been convincingly captured on video. Many are clearly optical illusions, sundogs or lens flares, but a few have been rather compelling. My first question: can you please tell us your opinion on whether you believe that these videos are most likely the product of optical illusions, or whether it is possible that some have actually been able to catch glimpses of our binary star? And my second question, I'll wait for you to answer that question, and then I'll move on to my follow-up.
Okay. In my opinion, the dual sun phenomenon that we've been seeing on the internet and these videos in Korea and in China, which are the most compelling, are in essence optical illusions. One of the giveaways is that the second sun is almost the same size as the real sun, but it's less intense. And in the bus pictures where they were showing, I think it was in Korea when they were filming, the bus pictures are a secondary reflection as the light came into behind the camera that was filming it, bounced off of that window and projected onto the window in front of the camera. In China, it was, again, an optical illusion over the horizon, similar type things. These have been seen many times before in the past, before we even had fancy cameras and telescopes. So I don't think they're seeing a second sun. It's just an optical illusion. Question number 2.
Yes, my second question. If some of these, if they are optical illusion, I'm not sure if my second question is even relevant. Because my second question was, if some of these sightings are truly of our binary stars, can you please explain how and why it would be visible at certain times and locations by some, but not by all?
Well, I think that has been answered by my answer to the first question.
Exactly. So.
Okay, we'll move on to the aliens and hidden technology. Gemini, you have a question for Stan.
I do. Good evening, Stan. Do you believe that benevolent aliens exist? What type of life are they, and will they intervene on humanity's behalf?
Well, that's a big question. Needs a big answer. Short answer is yes, there are benevolent extraterrestrials. Where they are from, if they're from another little planet or another galaxy or another star system, this is debatable until the cows come home. However, from my studies of ancient documents, Hebrew, some Sumerian documents, and Chaldean stuff, and Egyptian stuff, I do think that mankind was created here in the last, 6,000 years. We're created here for part of a courtroom drama. At the best I can say is for settling a conflict in a parallel universe concentric to our own. When they speak of the heavens in the various cultures and religions, they talk about heavens up or outward from the planet. They point that way. With the model that I'm developing for this gravitational theory, it happily allows multiple coexisting existences of universes which have common central points that their mass comes together and then expands back and forth and they pass through each other like ghosts almost because of the frequency and the phasing between their atoms. So in the Hebrew Bible, for instance, they're talking about at least 3 levels of existence, and the upper level being where God, the oneness, the Elohim, dwell. there was a conflict up there, a challenge for the orders, what the old writings say. And rather than have a war, the rebellion or the challenge for the way that the whole place was to be run was put into a virtual courtroom, which was Earth and the human population in the northeastern part of Africa, probably in Ethiopia, where the Danakil Plains are now covered with magma, but before then it was like a garden complex. Evidence does show, geological evidence and archaeological evidence does show that the mitochondrial Eve did start somewhere in the Omo Valley, northeast Africa, very close to where I found the Garden of Eden in the Danakil Plains in the research I've done. Now, that's where the human, the Adam and Eve type legend started, but they seem to have interfaced with other beings, other humanoids, because Cain married somebody in the east of Eden over what's now India. So there was one set of special kind of beings created there by the non-humans, the creators. Now, we call them, aliens or extraterrestrials, whatever you want to call them. They're definitely not from around virtual environment that won't hurt the heavens, as this battle for authority and structure of how the universe should be run is fought here in this legal courtroom. Now, because of this, the guys that were challenging the authority, the established order out there, kind of tried to pollute the virtual environment here, the virtual courtroom, to make it finish the way they wanted to at the end of this 6,000 or 7,000 years of testing the new order of things, a dictatorial type structure rather than a grassroots type structure. The Bible does say, in fact, even parts of the Quran do say, that we are going to see two waves of aliens. Bad guys come first, posing as good guys, is a simplification. Later deposed by the real good guys who come into the courtroom of the earth and say, okay, game's over, out of the pool, this is it. You've cheated too many times, and the decision is made by yourself. It won't work. It won't be stable. In the final edition of my book, The Cosmic Conspiracy, last year, I added a chapter on this very issue based on just 8 verses that I retranslated from the Hebrew, Arabic, some Sumerian words, Chaldean. And it shows in these 8 verses out of the book of Daniel, written in about 600 BC, that there's going to be a super alien God, little g, come to earth posing as God, and he will give technology to the ruler of the earth at that time, the human, that will be in charge, to make a dictatorial order, new world order that favors strength, or like the whip or the lash. It's going to be a dictatorial structure. And this alien being, this super being, which will probably be called Satan, and those who side with him in this rebellion, will all be cast down to earth from their level of the heavens for the last great battle. So, do I believe in aliens and good aliens? Yes. They're not just simply accidental, beings that occurred on some other planet. These are the creators of what we know here, and perhaps of the entire universe for that matter. I mean, it's to us it's a big place, but for beings that have been in existence for billions, if not forever, of years, this could be nothing more than a supercomputer that we call our universe. A dynamic, interactive computer, but still a computer. So, yes, we have bad guys posing as good guys coming and are here now. I think a lot of what we've seen as far as abduction cases by Greys and beings that hurt people in the analysis and experiments they did, these were a ploy put out by the bad guys so that we could have our bad guy Greys, our allegedly good guys that look like us, perhaps a little better looking and maybe, 9 or 10 feet tall on the average. But this whole thing is to satisfy what a lot of the religions are looking for as far as an arrival of a Messiah, to get rid of the bad guys. And this will all still be a deception, because the writings say in Daniel and in Matthew, when the real creator, the real extraterrestrial, if you want to call it that, but the real creator of all that we know, Yeshua, when he arrives, everything on the planet that is alive will know instantly. It's like the lightning striking from the eastern horizon to the western horizon, right across. It won't be someone saying, okay, look, he's in his flying saucer out here in the desert, go see him there, or he's in an underground bunker, go see him there, or he's in orbit around the planet, go see him there. The real creator has control of everything. Super technology, the technology. So with all those kind of contributory thoughts, I answer your question saying, yes, there are benevolent aliens, benevolent creator.
Thank you. And do you feel that, based on all the Earth changes that are coming up, that the time frame for these benevolent aliens to show up is during that time period, sometime after that? Do you have a thought on that?
The truly benevolent ones, under the leadership of Yeshua, Jesus, they say in English, the truly benevolent one will come at the end of these Earth changes when it looks like all hope is lost and every living thing on the planet's about to die. But before it does, the truly benevolent creator will return, lock up the bad guys, and lock up those who have sided with him, and start repairing the planet, teaching us how to live within the blueprint of the planet the way it should be. And I don't know what kind of power or energy we'll be using or how food will be grown, but there will be nations all over the world, and they will survive and start to build a new culture of man on the planet as a planet rather than just simply nation states. And I think this, if you look at prophecies that speak of this time, we're looking at between 7 and 10 year period where these changes start and lead up to a really violent 7-year period at the end of this 7 to 10 years. And at the very end of that 7-year period, very close to it, is when people just think there's no hope. Those that are left on the planet will think there's no hope. Fortunately, the Bible is very specific in many places in Hebrew and Greek that there will be a protection of those who understand what this is all about, like I've been telling you, who side with the true Messiah, the Yeshua ben Elohim, and they will be taken to a place of safety. Some call it the rapture. We know that it was like it was with Noah. He was put inside of an ark. Maybe we'll be put inside of a craft, or maybe we'll be transdimensional in some kind of a different kind of body. But I firmly believe there will be a segment of the human population saved out of that terrible time of tribulation that we're approaching now. That's the good news. So people that side with the Messiah, as I explained in the book, if you recognize that he is our doorway to the Elohim, the Creator, then once you've done that and follow him and the teachings, you're going to be in that group that is saved, like Noah was. It does say it's like in the times of Noah, so shall it be in the last days of this age, not the end of the earth, just the end of this age. And then we'll have that 1,000-year period of rebuilding the planet under a leader, a king that knows the planet, that helped to design the whole system and can make it work together for us, truly in harmony.
Thank you, Stan.
Okay.
Athena, you have a question for Stan.
Yes, Stan. In your most recent Coast to Coast interview with George Noory, you addressed the ancient folklore surrounding the Anunnaki, who allegedly accompany the brown dwarf on its periodic journey into our solar system and actually live inside the star, I believe. While I'm persuaded that a brown dwarf star does exist, we have heard that you think they live underground and off the heat inside the planet. But I'm having difficulty believing that any race of beings might theoretically be able to survive on this celestial body. Can you please explain your theory in greater detail?
Well, first of all, this mystery object out there, this Planet X, I don't think it's a star. I think it would be fairly unlikely that a race of beings could live on the star in bodies like ours or inside of the star. Not impossible, but fairly unlikely. A planet orbiting out where its orbit would be a 3,600-year period would, for the majority of its orbit, be out so far that it would be cold, it would be frozen, and you couldn't grow stuff on it, and the light from the sun wouldn't be a big help. However, if that planet follows the same rule that I'm seeing here on Earth and on Mars and on a number of moons of Saturn and Jupiter, and on our moon, if it follows the pattern, the poles open up periodically and close periodically. They're only open for brief times and then they close. which is a natural progression of this containment or organizing gravity wave. So if they were living inside of a planet which had a hot core, then they would have a low-grade light source to grow and keep warm, and it would be like a spaceship that they lived on the inside of as it went out in its far reaches of the orbit and came back in toward the sun. As it came back in toward the sun, they may have a way to just open up artificial holes, or maybe have tunnels dug, I don't know, to come out of the inside of that planet, jump over, visit Earth, like Sitchin said it happened, and then go back to their planet and go back home. So I don't have trouble with this at all. In fact, even in the biblical records, they talk about a bottomless pit. And a bottomless pit is the inside of a sphere. There's no bottom inside there. There can be shells, but if you're inside the earth living, we could actually have beings trapped down there in some form of existence, whether they be like bodies like ours or not, that the Greeks talked about, the Romans talked about, the Hebrews talked about. It's Hades, it's Tahom, the great depths down there. It's hell, and that's, maybe it's hot from the core inside there, and maybe these beings are trapped in there, imprisoned in there for the time of the end of this great courtroom. I don't have trouble with them living on a planet that goes out there and comes back with a 3,600-year period if it has a hot core inside of it and if its polar regions do open and close periodically or artificially. That's what I explained on the Coast to Coast show, and my theory does predict that.
Thank you, Stan.
Yes, ma'am.
Ong Bobby, you have a question for Stan.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Several years ago, I read a book by Tom and Anita Horn called The Airman Gate. It got me to looking at stargates, for lack of a better term. My understanding is that historical evidence shows that these gates were around thousands of years ago. Could you give us some information regarding these gates?
Okay. Yes, that's quite a good question, actually. I've talked with Tom about that. The ziggurats that some of the bases of them still exist in the Velvet Plateau and in various places in the Middle East. These ziggurats, I think, were copies of and poor man copies of what Nimrod was trying to build in the Tower of Babel. In the Middle Eastern languages, Babel is Bab and El, which Bab is doorway and El is short form for God. So it was a doorway to God, much like the Stargate series talked about at Heaven's Gate. Well, this is God's doorway. It's Hebrew, briefly in the English, that God, they, said, let us go down and destroy this tower that they've built, because they become as one of us if we let them continue. Now, it might mean that they will be able to gate through a gateway to the parallel or concentric universes above us. I found a stela, which was in the time of Marduk, and 2/3 of the stela survived World War II, and the Germans trying to destroy a number of things. They did survive, and I looked at the images carved into the stela in the time of Marduk, and it's a ziggurat. It's a front view, front view of the ziggurat, and then a plan view from the top of the top floor where God was supposed to meet with man. The fragmentary legends or reports that go with this said that the gods would come into the top floor, would then be fed and entertained by stuff left there by the humans on the top level for a certain period of time, hours perhaps, and while their energy levels started to normalize, and then they would go down to the next level of the ziggurat where there was more food and entertainment for them until they had gone down 2 or 3, maybe 4 levels where they were discharged enough, where their energy levels were more normalized to our atoms here, so that when they touched people or came close to them, it wouldn't burn them or shock them to death. And these things are in the drawings, in the carvings in that stela. So I'm pretty certain that there's some kind of a way to gate between our existence and at least one or more concentric or parallel universes. So I think Tom's exploration of that subject is very good. It needs more work. All of us would like to see more. But there's certainly a smoking gun there. Something did happen that would allow mankind to gate into an area that he didn't belong in. I don't think it was like a Stargate, to go jumping galaxies, although that might be possible. What we're seeing in the old writings was just in the immediate parallel or concentric universes where the phase differences between our nuclear fields are such that we pass between each other like ghosts and don't see or touch each other at all unless we have a gate to gate us into them. Along that line, Tom and I have talked about the odd things that people report, like when they have angels or gods appear to them from the sky. Usually heat and fire or lightning attend these sightings or these appearances, as though the atoms of these beings is at a much higher energy density and has to normalize. Whereas when we hear reports of ghosts and demons appearing from the lower levels, they call them down, lower levels, these are of lower energy density, and that's why the rooms get cold as these beings try to manifest or do manifest around us. So, these things all do tend to support the structure I'm telling you about.
Thank you, Stan.
All right.
Patrick, you have a question for Stan.
Yes, hi, Stan.
Hi.
Stan, I recognize several similar technologies while reading through your gemstone papers, and listening to your interviews. Many similarities popped out. Firstly, in talking about ether or the Dirac sea or zero-point medium, have you ever come across the descriptions of the same thing from Tom Bearden or Nassim Haramein? They seem to be addressing the same thing, and can you relate this back to alchemy and possibly ancient understandings of ether? And does any of this tie into mind over matter?
Wow. Well, yes, the Dirac sea or the ether sea is exactly what I'm talking about. It's a fluid, and I firmly support the fact that we should use hydrodynamic or fluid equations to describe celestial mechanics and cosmology as well. This medium is, I guess we can say there are levels within levels within levels as far down as you want to go. We have stopped at the level which is the fluid of the ether sea, which is so fine that it's like a fluid when it makes up a single quote-unquote particle, which is nothing more than a waveform of spin in that fluid. The alchemy, the mind over matter, these things would manipulate that fluid space and things within it, if I understand alchemy correctly. Alchemy is more, in my opinion, dealing with nuclear chemistry that is harmonic instead of fission or fusion. It is a controlled exchange of energy and energy levels of matter that's being transmuted. You can, for instance, take lead and hypothetically induce the lead molecules or lead atoms to throw off energy at a certain frequency, which is collected or emitted as heat somewhere else. And as it throws off this energy, its nucleus and its electron shells change, and it becomes gold. Transmuting other elements to gold or to other elements, I believe, is not a problem. It can be done, and I think that energy can be supplied and extracted from the universe in a number of ways using the concept of harmonic strip mining of the energy or spin energy of atoms and subatomic particles. Ideally, instead of just chaotically running in like fission does or like fusion, pushing things together and causing, core collisions, which release a lot of heat and other electromagnetic energy that's harmful. Instead of doing that, we know that atoms that are above absolute zero anywhere in the universe are exchanging energy between themselves in an infrared band, in a heat band. And if we get into that band and make tuned circuits that respond to infrared frequencies exchanging between atoms, we can take that energy, instead of letting it go between atoms as it does normally, and make it as electricity using something like a triboluminescent element which converts heat or thermodynamic energy directly into electron flow. It's like using the reverse phosphor on an old TV set, these tube TVs. They had a triboluminescent zinc oxide structure and zinc sulfides on the surface of it. You hit it with an electron, it produced light. By the same token, if you hit it with that frequency light, it produces electrons. It works backwards, much as T. Henry Murray did in his work in Utah, producing or collecting energy from the environment around his wire antenna. with those large high voltage diodes that he made out of germanium, or had made anyway. So all these things do get back to what we're talking about, to a fluid space. And as far as mind over matter, I know that I've had prophetic dreams. I know that I've also had personally hunches or sudden impulses to call somebody when they needed help or something, and it's like telepathy or ESP. These things have to transmit from point A to point B somehow, and there is that ether space between us, and there may be a frequency band that we're not aware of or don't use. That is how this information is transmitted. So I think what you're saying has merit.
Well, thank you. That reminds me a little bit about scalar technology and transmitting information instantaneously. Does your work involve scalar technology, as Bearden constantly refers to? I have a hard time understanding what scalar standing waves are, but it might be the same as your theory of orbital positions, interferometry on a planetary scale.
Well, scalar to me is a dimensionless scale, and it's a nothing. It's just a number. I haven't really been comfortable with the term scalar waves, but I think what they really mean is a mechanical wave of some structure that is a standing wave. That would coincide with what I'm talking about with the discrete orbital patterns or distances in a solar system. My analysis of it is basically on the volume of fluid spun in a particular orbit and distributing that same volume of energy out into the next orbit and to the next and to the next, allowing for that volume to be spread and that energy to be spread over a bigger area. And it does form discrete mean circular orbits, even though they're elliptical in some cases. Their mean orbit is still circular, following that path. And I agree with you. Looking at the model I've got for the solar system and the wave structure in the fluid of space, it does set up relatively stable standing waves. Over a period of time, they do change directions. Not direction. Well, they don't change direction. They change distances, from the center of the spin, which is the sun. If you were to take a bucket of paint and take a hand drill with one of those little paint stirring rods on it, stick it right in the middle of that bucket of paint and pull the trigger so that it spins up the paint. If you have one of those drills where you can vary the speed with the pressure on the trigger, you will see that at some speeds, standing waves do form around that spinning rod in the middle of the paint. If you change either up or down the speed of that drill, then the rings will move out or in and form new sets of rings. In the changeover period, some waves will become additive and make a higher peak. Others will cancel out and make a flat valley. And if you're a planet occupying one of those things that cancel out, your orbit disappears, and you've got a problem. Maybe that's what happened to the asteroid belt. But these things are all fluid mechanics and sort of standing waves if you take snapshots of time in our lifetime rather than in planetary scale, where they're constantly changing. I do think that they're similar to what they're calling scalar waves, though.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to switch over to electricity, if you don't mind. Your description of electricity in the Gemstone papers reminds me of Ed Liskalin's work, the guy that built Coral Castle.
Yeah.
He issued an instructional pamphlet encouraging readers to rethink or re-educate themselves about the nature of electricity or magnetics. Does your theory of everything coincide with Liskalin's, and would there be some hint on how he's able to levitate or manipulate the huge structures he was able to?
Well, Liskalin's work is it's fascinating. The remnants of electrical cables that are underneath all of his little coral castle have been found. The leftovers of part of that circular electromagnetic thing down inside the basement there where he was working do indicate that he was using electricity. He was familiar with that, and electromagnetism. I do believe that we can manipulate matter with certain types of waves to make the matter either weightless or weigh less, so that it's like a balloon that will float to a certain level, go no higher and no lower, like specific densities. I don't know exactly how Leeds-Callan did. He could have done it with sound. He could have done it with electricity and sound, or just purely electricity and magnetism. He obviously didn't want anybody there when he was loading that truck that time he moved the whole site to another location. He loaded those huge stones at night, in one night by himself, which does indicate that in addition to the leverages that he did use, because he had a tower and he did use lever mechanics to move some of the things, that might have been just fine positioning at the end of having moved large masses over to where he was. If you look at sound waves, for instance, he could have moved some of those things by putting like say a gasoline motor or an electric motor with a thumper that would hit the stone that he's trying to move with a certain frequency, and he would tune it until the stone started to sing or started to vibrate in resonance with its own natural resonant mode. And if you use two of those on that same stone, one would start to make the energy of the stone itself, its own mass, bounce up and down or forward and back, and another would shove it along a path where it would weigh less for a fraction of a second, and it would be moved during that time, which is kind of like saying that he could just scoot it then across the surface by pushing on it or pulling with, a very small motor or himself. That would be acoustic levitation, causing the energy to be stored up into the stones that way. Electromagnetically, I'm sure there's a way to do it. What I've worked on here, what I've seen, required creating a pulsed, spinning DC field. He could have done that with what he had there in the basement there in that little round circle with all the little horseshoe-looking magnets in it. But with a pulsed DC circuit, heavy current, and possibly a secondary current with that operating at 90-degree phasing so that they overlapped and formed a spinning donut-shaped vortex, he could have generated a lower gravitational field or a local gravitational field in the stone itself, maybe by ringing the atoms and aligning them that way. I mean, I do know that we have anti-gravity and that mankind does, and that it made saucer-shaped craft and some other ones weightless and altered time passage on them because of the density of the field and that kind of stuff. So did Leeds-Callan have that? I don't know. But, the clues he left behind do indicate that he was very close the same way.
Thank you. Also, in the earlier videos describing your work in Australia, you mentioned a peer's work on electric-based anti-gravity, where conductors were wrapped around a donut. Have you ever come across the work of Marco Rodin and the Rodin coil? Its similarities are astounding, actually. Marco's windings are geometrically based around a toroid, and his theory leaves a gap in the wrappings. He constantly refers to DC impulse current, as does John Bedini and Tom Bearden. Does your research in electrogravitics complement or support theirs?
It's pretty close, yes. The craft that I saw the photos of in the assembly area for, the large 30-foot diameter craft had a flat wire. It was like cable, but it was like a half-inch thick and maybe 4 to 6 inches wide. It's close as I could estimate from the guy standing next to it. And that was wrapped around the outside of the torus, the mu metal former, which had a bite out of it, like a washer would have, like an iron washer with a cut in it to allow the field to breathe, as they called it. Now, inside that, there was another coil, a flat wire coil, and on the outside, there were two separate coils on either side of the donut, which were flat wires that were wound flat, like pancake, one layer, and those were then bent over the craft, and this was part of navigational things, I think, to make it move one way or the other. I do know it was very important for the coils, the side coils, to be, they were DC coils, but they had to be in an exact polarity relationship to each other. You couldn't have the insides of them being plus plus or minus minus or minus plus. There was one of them had to be the way it was done, otherwise the correct way. Otherwise, when you fired up the field and started storing the energy into these two main coils, the toroidal coils, it would get to a certain point and then convert into to heat. It would have a hysteresis curve. It would reach that, and it would melt down and vaporize the craft in several cubic meters around when it did. So it's very important. They would lay these things on the floor in the assembly area and tape signs on them showing which side of the coil was to be the plus side and minus side if they put these side coils on. These are not essential to making anti-gravity. They're essential to the navigational things that they use. The anti-gravity, like this rodent coil you're talking about, everything that I have seen and been told inside the organization on that was that it did take pulse DC. And it stores energy in these coils. So you have one coil wrapped, normally like you can see it like a pharaoh's headband around the donut. And then you have another coil like the inside of a hat band, which is inside the donut running around at angle to the pharaoh's headband type coil on the donut. And what they would do is they would transfer energy from one coil to the other one in phase with the input energy that you're putting into the circuit. And what would happen is that using the hollow mu metal core for the coils, they would store energy in that mu metal just kind of periodically, a very short period between the one coil and the other as it passed energy, rocked it back and forth, all going the same direction. Now, how they control that kind of current, where they got the semiconductors that needed or, the gauging technology, I don't know. But that's what they did, and you could take like a Volkswagen engine, a small little Volkswagen car, convert the energy out of that into a generator and pulse it into a field for a coil that big. And you might have to do it 20 to 30 minutes because it's such a small motor, but it stored the energy into it like a electromagnetic balloon in essence, with spin. And you could pump up the field so that pretty soon it would start to get lighter and lighter because it had its own gravitational field, which would be in opposite spin to the Earth where it was at that point, and it would start to rise up. Then you've got to navigate it left, right, whatever, but you could go up and down simply by just pumping energy in over an amount of time and storing it in those two circuits, rocking back and forth at high speed, of course, but 50, 60 times a second.
Thank you very much.
Gemini, you have a question for Stan.
Yes, Stan, this is for Percy as the forum moderator. He'd like to hear your thoughts on the Byfield-Brown effect and if he knows what frequencies and voltage patterns Townsend-Brown used. We are trying to replicate the effect to commercialize it. This would lead to being able to create levitating vehicles and, if Brown was correct in his patents, an energy device that gates energy from higher dimensions to produce electricity for free.
Well, I did talk with Townsend and correspond with him, and I also, before he died, and I also visited his lab at the Monson Corporation before they dismantled it. A film crew and I from Australia went there and at Salem and looked through the devices he had there. And I studied a lot of his papers. I've got them here. And he told me himself that a lot of the work he had done had been blown out of proportion by various popular writers. No point a finger, but like on the Philadelphia experiment and things like that. What Townsend's Byfield-Brown effect is something that I've addressed in the Gemstone 1 paper. When you pulse DC circuit, whether it be high voltage and low current or high current, low voltage, when you pulse a DC current flow into a conductor, it will develop an imbalanced torque. Now, on the Townsend-Brown discs that flew around that circle, what they were doing was pulsing, relaxing at, I think he was doing around 100,000 volts on his beta machine. In essence, that was allowing the stress of the imbalanced torque to be passed to the air around that little saucer shape and move it around. I don't think that he was gating, and he never mentioned that to me, that he was gating from, some mysterious energy source. He was simply using that effect of the pulse DC current, which causes that torque imbalance. That's why the wires in that Gemstone 1 paper I've written, why the wires twist and then relax, twist and then relax. It's the imbalance of two fields that form in a conductor, the initial high energy pulse down the wire and the return, inertial return wave coming back up to where you started the current. So in a DC current, there's actually two going in that wire, two directions happening until they balance, and they don't notice it, but there's really primarily one directional flow, but the inertia is balanced by that inner core of the conductor. I really believe that's what the Townsend or the Byfield-Brown effect was saying, was just using a disc instead of wires like I've used in my experiment. In fact, that's kind of what led me to experiment with that.
Okay, thank you, Stan.
All right.
I recently listened to your interview with Patrick Timpone on Know the Source. Can you discuss your invitation to build a flying saucer by Dr. Kelly, and for what purpose, to what end were you invited to do such? And furthermore, did a saucer land in Roswell that was not ours, or was it part of our government craft?
Okay, well, first of all, the first part of your question, the project that I was invited to join rather strongly was under the direction of Dr. Edward Teller, the guy they call the father of the hydrogen bomb. He's a Hungarian fellow, very, very bright fellow, but his invitation to me came to me in Dallas when I was working in industry there, and I was approached by Dr. James R. Maxfield, who ran a radiation research lab there, and also was a partner with Dr. Teller on the project of anti-gravity and the various other attendant technologies they were developing since the end of World War II. They did approach me. The only way I could figure they even found out what I was doing was that in the computer business where I was in Dallas, I had an office in a large corporation and was the head of disaster solutions for the business. They had 3,000 employees, and I headed up the systems analysts and programmers who solved major problems that occurred. So I had my own private office and a blackboard that you could swivel around and see one side and then the other side. And during the day, I would work on, company business, and on my breaks and whatever, I would turn over to the back and do my equations and look at various ways to, make anti-gravity or make a craft fly. Among other things. And I think somebody must have come into my office and seen that when I wasn't there, because I was approached by one of the presidents of the subsidiary companies that were all owned by this corporation there in Dallas. And it was like they owned insurance companies and casinos and, all kinds of stuff. But this president came in, and he was a European, Polish gentleman, older man. And he knew what I was doing, and he said, "Look, I know what you're doing at home, and I think you ought to talk to a friend of mine, this Dr. James R. Maxfield." And so it took me a month and a second approach by this guy before I actually went over and met with this Dr. Maxfield. And well, I tell you what, life changed right then, because when I went into his office, his private office there in his research lab, just he and I, and pictures along the wall of him in a submarine going underneath the pole with Teller and celebrating with champagne. And, I was meeting with, guys that had training, mathematics way beyond me, and physics, way beyond me. And I thought, wow, why do they want to talk to me? These guys have been out there and done it all. And so he sits me down, this Maxwell guy, and he says, "Okay, tell me what you're doing at your lab there at home, boy." And I said, "Well, gosh, it's like, you're called in to talk to the leading physicist of the world, and he wants to have you explain what you're doing. You feel like a pimple down there next to a mountain." And you say, "Well, gosh, I've been kind of thinking about how gravity and electricity and magnetism all work together." And he said, "Oh, look, don't fence with me. I know what you're working on. You're working on anti-gravity. Now, we've already done that. We've been there and done that, and we're still doing it. And we've been doing it since the early 50s. And we'd like for you to join our project and help us, with other things to develop." And of course, when my jaw kind of closed finally after hitting the desk, I thought, where do you do all this? He said, "A number of places, and we'd like for you to come join us in our Australian facility." And that was the start of them. He picked up the phone, called the Australian consulate there, in San Francisco. We were in Dallas, and he called them and said, "Look, tell Bob Gray, who was the director there that you need to talk to," and he said, "Tell him that Maxwell has another one of his boys to go to Australia, make the arrangements." And that's when it started. They told me to settle up my affairs, tell no one where I was going, not even family, and that they would take care of getting me down to Australia to the facility and joining the project. And it took a few months of medical tests and various other things and filling out forms to be an engineer immigrating into Australia to dot the I's and cross the T's. But they put me under my control agent down there was Captain Sir John Williams. He was knighted by the Queen during World War II for his work in recovering gold bullion that was sunk in a ship over near New Zealand. Anyway, he was my guy, and that's who I would answer to down there. We didn't stay connected too long. Within a year and a half, I was unhappy with the way they were holding back certain technologies, and I wanted to share it with people and other countries that needed it, for water and food and energy production. They've got the little black boxes that are about 2 to 3 feet square cube. They can produce huge amounts of electricity out of the atmosphere and out of the infrared region I was telling you about in nuclear exchanges between atoms. All these things were being held back and are still being held back, while the crusades of the legendary crusades of the past are still being fought with the Western Judeo-Christian nation base fighting against the Islamic base and trying to burn up and destroy all their oil, saving our oil and our energy until the time that they can control the global government. It's a very, very incestuous type things between the physicists and the bankers and industrialists that form this, well, I guess you'd call them the Illuminati, but they do control governments. I've watched that there in Australia firsthand, but that's how I got recruited into it, and it's that was many years ago, but yeah.
I appreciate that, Stan. And then to Roswell, was that
Right.
one of our craft?
Well, I don't know. The evidence that I have personally been able to get from people involved in Roswell does support that. One man died, a pilot that flew parts of the remains back to Fort Worth, and his son and I talked about it, and before his dad died on his deathbed, he did say to him, after years of silence, he did tell his son, yes, they were aliens, they did crash, and it is real. Now, if you'd have known his father, this particular pilot, he was one of the kind of old school that was very patriotic and just would not break the confidentiality on it until he was on his deathbed. I also, when I was a teenager in Dallas, before I joined any of these projects and that kind of stuff, just a normal kid, was visiting a friend of mine where they flew the bodies. And we were sitting in his kid's living room, he and I, in the afternoon, and another guy with us, another kid. And we were talking about, ghost stories and one-upping each other. And he said, well, I can top all this because my dad flew a plane back with bits and pieces that I've actually held from a crashed flying saucer in Roswell. And he described the gear ratios, the 9-tooth ratios and that kind of stuff, and how the metal was in layers and that you could peel off with a knife. And, I kind of passed it off like kids do, that, well, okay, that's a good story. But when you put it together with other first-hand participants telling me this, or their sons this, and passing it to me, it does indicate to me that there was an alien ship that did crash, one, maybe two at that time. And I think that they are the bad guys being set up as bad guys by the other part of bad guys is pretending to be good guys. If that sounds convoluted, but I think it's all part of the overall plan I was telling you about, and not just some accidental alien presence here. They're super beings. They certainly are superhuman beings, and but they are fallible. They can break. They can die, and this is it all fits with what I've studied in prophecy as well. So, yeah, Roswell did occur.
That's fascinating, Stan. Thank you.
You bet.
Ground Ron, do you have a question for Stan?
Yeah. Wow, I'm just listening to all the technology you found yourself stumbling into. I in '73 was winding up my own 5-foot Tesla coil and hoping I wasn't going to blow everybody else up at Science Fair. Stan, in your Gemstone Scrolls Part 1, You explain in detail the 169-year-old Armstrong wine glass experiments. It appears you have spent a lot of time recreating and analyzing those results. From that research, you've developed some powerful and yet straightforward mathematical formula. Some of these allow anyone to express the electrical variables, current, resistance, and voltage in terms of classical Newtonian MLT values. That's mass, length, and time. The work is simply staggering, something which should be taught to every young scientist, engineer, or physicist on the planet. Actually, anyone who has learned basic algebra and geometry should be taught these as the new physics of reality. For purposes of this interview, could you please summarize the wine glass experiment for our listeners? And could you help us visualize why the returning remnant power, P sub R, equates to electrical current in equation 26, as well as marvel with us for a moment over how voltage becomes a dimensionless number expressed as nothing more than a ratio. Thank you.
Wow. I haven't even looked at the paper, in detail in several years, so I don't know what equation 26 is. But let me say, first of all, on the Lord Armstrong experiment, he had a steam boiler that he found that the steam ejecting out of it, out of a particular shaped nozzle, would generate tremendous high voltages, direct current high voltages that he could use in his experiments with electricity. Now, these experiments are being reproduced now on the Internet. I've seen a number of videos of people duplicating the first parts of his experiment, where they have 2 glasses of distilled water and run a direct current, high voltage current into one glass, and it forms a water bridge, like a wire, but it's just of water, over to the second glass. Now, I have not seen it on the Internet where they've had close-up pictures and used dust or pepper or powder of some sort to show the motion of the water inside that connecting tube that goes between the 2 glasses. But let me back up and explain what this is from in Armstrong's experiment. He found that he could take 2 wine glasses and put them touching each other and put distilled water in them and run electricity into one glass, and he could cause the electricity to make water climb up the edge of that glass and over the lip of the other glass and down into the water of that glass. Now, several things he tried. First, he took a silk thread and he taped it to the bottom of the first glass and let that thread hang over the lip, so where the 2 glasses were touching, so that the water could well up over that silk thread and surround it, and it kind of expand a bit, and he could then pull the glasses apart with that silk thread in the middle of a channel of water around the outside of it. Now, remember that silk thread was taped down. Now, he did that so that he could see this arc of water going over the wire into the second glass, which is grounded. It was earthed. When he untaped the silver or the silk thread on the first glass, when he let it flow freely, it would be jerked out of its glass over into the other glass, and what would remain would be a thread of water where the silk thread used to be. There'd be a thread of water, a tube of water hanging in the air between the 2 glasses, and they were only about an 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch apart. I think he was around 50,000 volts DC that he was using, but with a fairly high current one. Now, he determined by experiment and putting like pepper and other ash and things into the water that there were 2 currents running simultaneously between those glasses. One as an inner core in that bridge of water, and the other was an outer core in that bridge of water. And the currents were in opposite directions, even though it was a direct current exchange. This led to him doing a number of other experiments as well, finding that when he anchored that silk thread, he could drain one glass into the other as long as that silk thread was anchored or taped to the bottom of the initial glass. Again, if he undid it and let the water flow, the levels would stay the same in the 2 if that water bridge was allowed to be there and no silk thread was involved at all. these experiments without the silk thread are being shown on the internet in a number of YouTube videos. Now I think you can just search for water, glasses, bridge, high voltage, or something like that, and find them. There were several I found when I looked here a couple of weeks back. The observations that I made showed, by analyzing the fact that the volume of water in both glasses did not change as long as there was no silk thread anchored down. It was an exchange of water. The volumes were the same, but the speed at which the inner core of the water and the outer core of the water, that speed was different. And so I tried to analyze that and figure out how, and you'll see in the drawings I've done, explaining equal volumes of water being exchanged, but at different speeds, as far as the chunk that drops off into the host glass and into the receiving glass. By analyzing the flow of energy density on the water, I was able to explain missing or the mystery of how you can have a circuit, electric circuit, running resistances, but still have stuff going back in to the main battery that's powering the circuit. There's always energy left over. You don't have it all being absorbed. And I was able to explain that missing part by the inertia and the momentum of the water portions moving in that bridge of water. The voltage, I've looked at tornadoes, which are big versions of the Armstrong tube. The voltage becomes a ratio of the diameter of the inner core tube and the outer tube surrounding it, and it's just a pure ratio, a ratio of energy exchange, if you wish. So it's a dimensionless thing, but a ratio, and I'm saying.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that. Go ahead.
Well, it's a very crude explanation. That's why it took me so many pages and equations and drawings to explain it in the paper. You got to rearrange your thinking in your mind. It's no longer mysterious charge action at a distance through nothingness, or magnetic field through nothingness. It's saying there is inertia in the fluid of space, and it's all MLT equation, just like you said. It just makes things so much more understandable in the real world.
Yeah, equation 26 brings us to Ohm's law, and you're equating current with the remnant power, P sub R, and the returning power. I was having trouble with making that mental leap between physical process and the electrical world mathematically.
Well, again, if you use Maxwell's version of electric charge and action at a distance, he sets up a scenario where you've got two electrons at a certain distance from each other, and that they will exhibit force on each other because of their electric nature. He doesn't explain this electric nature, but if you see the electric, quote-unquote, electric nature as spin in a fluid of space, then you've got angular momentum, you've got linear momentum, you've got things that you can play with that are just real effects in a solid fluid space. Then hydrodynamic equations without magic, just flow equations and the relative spin equations, then become the tools that you use to visualize and operate on electricity, or the exchange of energy. The power going one way must equal the power going the other way, but the energy density of that power is different. The energy on the atoms involved in the transfer of energy. It's like, imagine the atoms in one glass spinning faster and being allowed to share their spin with the slower atoms in the other glass, which is grounded. The energy must exchange. You never create or destroy energy. You exchange energy. And so you can have energy in one form which is the flow of energy at a certain speed, and the flow of a number of particles to generate energy, and less particles at a higher speed to generate the same power. That's how the PR and the primary energy can be related by energy density.
Thank you. I have just one more question, I guess. On page 16, you say, in essence, these equations are a portal to better understanding of the universe around us. In the following two parts of this paper, that portal will become even larger. Stan, please whet our appetite for more information about any upcoming releases of the Gemstone Scroll papers.
All right. Well, I was hoping to have released it by now, the second part, which is on gravity, because of the profound implications of the organizing or containment gravity field theory, which is a secondary, weaker force that NASA has observed but didn't know where it came from. And that's the one I'm addressing at the moment because it has immediate implications in propulsion and understanding our solar system and various other things that are happening with our planet and the Earth changes that are about to occur and started now. The third part of the paper will be probably a year off because that is it's of less importance but still useful, and that's in the nature of magnetism as inertia and how it basically magnetism occurs in any atomic lattice where the ratio of the distance between the atoms' centers divided by the radius to the outermost unfilled shell of those atoms is a ratio of about 2.8 to 3.2 to 1. And the thing will exhibit magnetic behavior. And that's a spacing thing so that you can basically compress or change the lattice of any mass and make it magnetic if you can get that ratio of spacing so that the outermost unfilled shell of one atom shares its outer shell with the other atom in kind of a dumbbell kind of spinning relationship. And as these line up, line after line after line, it forms a tremendous accelerator for those electrons in the outer shell. And the more of them you get, of course, the stronger the field effect is in that frequency range. But that's another issue. The gravity one is the next paper to come, and previews of it are there in the images I've got on that images for the show today. Major points in that will be that gravity, you do not have gravitational constants without spin. You'll have the spin of the atoms, or you'll have the spin of planets around a star, and these stars themselves, the star systems, their total spin is like an atom compared to the galaxy. And there's a containment field that contains the stars of the galaxy, and I suspect there's probably a galactic containment thing that contains galaxies in an order. But no gravitational constant exists in anything without spin about an axis. And that's one of the major things that's going to be shown. And the other is that there is a periodic inversion at the core of any gravitational reaction, and that you can form shells that are hollow and with periodic openings at the poles as the thing unwinds, and that everything is expanding in the universe, even down to stars, planets, galaxies, atoms. As they age, they expand in diameter until at some point in the far distant future, the Dirac sea is calm again and nothing exists except the sea. No atoms, nothing.
Thank you very much for that and everything you do, Stan. This is a really important information for humanity, in my opinion.
Well, I hope that what I've done is it's crude. I mean, it's not in matrix algebra or anything complex. But by using the illustrations and the animations and the equations, the basic equations, what I'm trying to do is give that as a tool to the young engineers, mathematicians, and physicists now coming up in the world with an open mind and say, look, take this as a building block, refine it, add to it, and go for it. But this is going to allow them to do a lot more and explain a lot more things that relativity could not. Certain things could be solved in relativity, but could not be brought back out into the real world through the mathematical gateway. And that's why we know that relativity had its problems.
Mulder, you have a question for Stan.
Yes, Stan. Wanted to ask you, I've seen some fascinating videos of permanent magnet motors on YouTube, which appear to actually show perpetual motion without any sort of electric current being involved. Do you think that such a thing is possible, or are these videos just hoaxes?
I don't know that they're hoaxes, but they might be misinterpreted. The idea of perpetual motion is in itself not correct, because even though you can have sustained motion for a long period of time, the universe is, at this point anyway, unwinding. Everything is expanding and getting larger diameter and slowing down, and energy is being redistributed through the Dirac sea, or the ether space. So in its final analysis, all relative motion will eventually become equal and stop, and there will be nothingness, nihilo. So for a magnet motor that appears to just keep running and running and running, what may be happening there, and I've studied a number of these, is that small amounts of energy are being strip mined out of the lattice of the magnetic of the magnets, so that energy is actually being converted from a nuclear source in a controlled harmonic manner, which allows the spin to continue. It's not free energy. It's not perpetual motion, because the atoms will eventually lose enough energy that they'll collapse the magnetic field, or it won't be magnetic any longer, and the thing will stop. But it may be 100 years or 1,000 years before that happens. They need, if they're going to do something like that, they need to get it so that they can extract more energy than is needed to keep the wheel moving, so that you can power your house and this kind of stuff. And that is possible. Whether these guys with their videos have got the answer yet, I don't think so, but again, I've not built or tested the models myself, and if I were running my house, I'd tell you. But I just think that we need to know where the energy is coming from that they're using to keep these things spinning. I've played with a number of these things too, and as I say, I think that it is coming from a nuclear source, and there's so much energy confined in the fluid of space itself and in the atoms, in spin, that just taking a minuscule part of it would keep those things spinning for many generations.
Okay, thank you. The second question for you. I noticed recently when I was at Costco that they were selling these bladeless fans, and they were these circular structures, and the air just flowed around the circle. And I assume what I was seeing was some sort of implementation of electromagnetic propulsion on the air, and that this was probably a similar principle to some of the early anti-gravitational, or at least earthbound atmospheric anti-gravitational principles that you were talking about. Does that sound correct to you?
Well, no. Look, I looked at some of those. You're talking about the Dyson air multiplier, and they have a cutaway of it showing there is a little fan down inside of it that shoves the air out through that hoop. So they do have a circular motion device down in the base of it that imparts motion to the air, at least in the manuals that I've viewed on his website. But yeah, I was impressed with it, but it's still like a normal fan. There's nothing magic about it. Just the way that it's using airflow in a most efficient way, and Dyson is really good at this. I mean, my hat's off to the guy. He's played with vortices to make his vacuum cleaners, and people don't realize what a magnificent thing he's done there. But the flow of air in that hoop, that ring fan, that bladeless fan, is the beginning of a way that you can make a flying saucer, not an anti-gravity, but just a toroidally driven entrainment flying saucer. I've designed a number of these, and plus the marine versions, and they all have that kind of hoop shape to the water or to the air, and they pulse the air out ahead of the craft, or the water out ahead of the submarine, and curl it back into the intakes, and so that the energy stores in a circulating field, which allows you to make much more efficient use of your power. I mean, go like many times where your normal fuel would take you in those two environments by using what he's got in that bladeless fan. It's a really good example of what I try to teach people.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, Stan, we've only got a few questions left. Onk Bubby, what's your question?
Well, Stan, a while back, a hacker had infiltrated certain military installations and recovered some information regarding UFOs and what he termed non-terrestrial officers. In my mind, that led me to think that they may have succeeded in disrupting one of these off-Terra gates. Do you see that as a possibility, that there are such gates being activated today, or what do you think?
Well, look, I can guess and say from what I've read in the old writings that such gates or gateways have existed, do exist, and that beings from the parallel universes are being gated in here at the moment. And I think the ones that are being gated primarily are the resistance or the challengers to the authority of the existence, the established order of God. And so it says in the last days of this age that we cast down the earth from the upper levels. So those gateways, I think, are being used that way, but I don't think we're being allowed to gate back. I think it's one way at the moment. And I have tried to build a toroidal gate in the past and found that a strange thing happened in the lab when I did it. It was donuts, these kind of donut wound coils, and I was pulsing DC through. And I had it sitting on the workbench in front of me, and as I hit the current to it at one of the make breaks that I did, it the light from everything in the room in front of me, from the table, from the walls, it was as though everything was painted on saran wrap and was being sucked into the center of this coil for a fraction of a second, and I was nauseous. I felt like I was rolling upside down just for a fraction of a second, and then it stopped working, and I could never get it to work again. So I think that such a thing is possible using toroidal coils for a gate, but I don't know how to control it.
Thank you for that. You kind of answered the follow-up on there, but what I wanted to find out, too, speaking before in an interview, you had spoke of the Secret of Secrets and the Return of the Sumerian. Can you elaborate?
The Secret of Secrets. Return of the Sumerian. I don't follow that. When did I say that?
Well, this was an interview, I think in 2005. You were speaking of someone through the Pentagon that spoke to you about the Secret of Secrets and the Return of Sumerian Gods.
Oh, Linda Moulton was talking about that, the Return of the Sumerian Gods in the Pentagon. This may be the fallen ones being cast down to earth, like, where the progenitors of the legend of Atlantis. They were sons of God that were put on earth and then violated the rules and were punished, et cetera, et cetera. Atlantis sank or was sunk. The return of these little g gods, super beings and super technology beings, it is forecast in the Bible, and certainly the Sumerian texts do relate to these super beings back then, being coming to the planet or being put on the planet, whichever way you choose. So what we're seeing now is what I expected from reading the ancient languages, and what I've seen inside the organization is that the bad guys are coming here in great number, and they're going to set up a deception so that the little grays become the real bad guys, when in essence both the little grays and the humanoids are the bad guys, the first lot. And these are the quote-unquote Sumerian-type gods that they spoke of in the old writings, and in India, in the legends in India as well. They're just, I hear snippets of things from people that fit into the whole concept that reinforce it, and these are from either military or UFO investigator types. And then from what I translate or read of other people's translations as well of the ancient documents, all these things seem to support that same central theme.
Thank you very much, Stan.
You bet.
Stan, in summarizing the hidden technology section, we've discussed a lot already. Obviously, measurements and theories are only good if you can, you're looking at a constant field. Basically, as I've heard, the electronic spin resonance has been changing since the 1960s. Even carbon-14 dating might be changing. Its half-life maybe because of the sun. How have you taken that into account, and how hard would it be? Maybe there'd be a set of new equations after the sun does its expansion theory in 2014. So have you thought about that?
Well, that's kind of what I was indicating when I was saying that I've laid the groundwork with the Gemstone 1 and what you'll see in Gemstone 2 paper of the way spin and exchange of energy leads toward final entropy until everything is at the same level. There will be no energy level differences. So sure, the electron spin resonance changes. Doesn't surprise me at all. I wasn't aware that it had changed, but if that's the case, it just supports what I'm telling you, is that everything is expanding, and it probably at various rates because of the structure of our solar system versus another one, or whatever the energy density at the time. But they all follow that expansion and entropy curve. It's not isentropy where it's gathering energy; it is losing energy, and when atoms die, and they die, a million times a second, but when they spin out and expand and disappear, that energy, the shells of energy that are thrown off, are absorbed by like atoms in that same frequency range. They will absorb that as spin and spin them up. In that case, it becomes isentropy, which is the reverse of entropy. But even that, eventually, all that gained energy is distributed over greater volumes of space, and then eventually to stillness. At least that's the way it's going now. There's one theory that says we'll get out to that point somewhere where all of a sudden everything will just collapse back in on itself. But I'm not too sure that's the case, because gravity is a function of spin, and if spin stops, there's nothing to pull everything back together again. It's just the Dirac sea. There's nothing there.
Okay, yeah, I agree. We've got two more questions, Stan. Gemini.
Stan, who in your opinion controls the Illuminati, and do you believe that U.S. presidents and other world leaders take their orders from the Illuminati?
Certainly the U.S. presidents and world do take orders from the Illuminists. I know that down in Australia, when I was still with the group, my controller, Sir John, and Sir Henry, one of the other guys in it, we were at the Melbourne Club having lunch one day, and this is where all the cotton top, cigar smoking, port drinking oldies gather. And I was told after that meeting, we were discussing the global economy and various other things, to ring the deputy prime minister of the country at home and tell him that he was to attend a certain meeting on energy exchange with the Dutch Shell Oil Group. And so, I called the deputy prime minister and told him to get his butt in order to get over to this meeting, because, the Illuminists had said so. He said, okay, be right there, do it, no problem. Got him out of the shower to do it. So I do know that world leaders do listen to these guys, and whether they are threatened, whether they are given bonuses that are just too hard to turn down in some way, I don't know. But that's the Western world, and the Arab nations and the Chinese, the Asian nations, are not fully on board with listening to the Illuminists. The Illuminists don't control them as much as people would like to think. Certainly Nixon tried, and various Kissinger's tried with the Chinese, the major Asian players. And the Asian players have now reversed the tables, and it's becoming a strong economy and a strong military. And so they're kind of, a fly in the ointment of the world Illuminist crowd. U.S. presidents, look at the current president we've got. He's not doing the decision-making, really. He's out playing golf or kicking sand down the beach or something fun, watching a basketball game or something. Getting him to do anything serious other than reading a speech is very difficult. But that's because he is just kind of a figurehead for the advisors behind him who are actually giving the orders and making things happen. I'm sure that other presidents before him have had more free time than we thought, because the Illuminists were doing their job. Good management's that way. You have a staff underneath you that can do all that stuff, and you become a figurehead and a manager. This guy just, anyway, Kissinger wants him to be the fair-haired boy, the first leader of the new world order, the new world government that is going to have to be established to solve the global economic problem and the global nuclear threat problem and the global geophysical changes problem, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see. I personally think that Obama is just too weak a character to be a strong global leader for the Illuminists. And the rest of the world knows it too. I mean, he's a joke overseas. People laugh at him and laugh at the Americans for letting him, be the president. But there's another guy I'm watching over in the Middle East that's really got my attention as far as a strong leader for what's coming. So we'll see.
Stan, who do you believe, in your opinion, controls the Illuminati? And if you can say who you're watching in the Middle East, I'd love to know that as well.
The Illuminati is a loose term which basically addresses the powerhouses of world banking in the Western world. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, there are the standard list of names. I've got them in the Cosmic Conspiracy, plus we've added new ones, I'm sure, over the years since I wrote the book. These are the people that are the movers and shakers at such a point of wealth that money is no longer really anything but power. And these people, you can see a lot of them in the City of London, the financial City of London, not the physical City of London, but the economic City of London. And you can see them in New York and various other islands where they've got tax havens and control of their lifestyle. I think a lot of them probably even have facilities underground in various places in cities that have been built in tunnels and large hollowed out areas that have all kinds of life support for them in there to weather most disasters. The Asian side of the equation, they probably have their equivalents of the Illuminists, but they are not as unified as the Western European American factions of this. I think even some Japanese have been involved in it as well. This is not a global control. They've certainly influenced global politics and economy for a number of decades, but that control it's got to come to a global structure almost immediately, and it will not be stable because there are elements within the Illuminists on the Western side and the Asian side, their equivalent, which are vying for control of the world government the way they want it. So it won't be stable, and it won't last more than a decade, probably not more than 6 or 7 years. There is a fellow in the Middle East, which I've mentioned in my book, The Vindicator Scrolls, which is now out of print. I've been watching him since 1988. He's about my age. He's about 65, 66 years old, and he's now gotten gray at the top, and he's the executive vice president, senior vice president of the Merhav, M-E-R-H-A-V group of companies out of Israel. He is not a religious man. He is against all this God, holiness, religious Bible, Torah stuff. He said that at private parties. He is a bright man, and he organized the first 100 days of Shimon Peres's prime ministership over in Israel. And his name is Nimrod Novik, which is an Assyrian name, and the scriptures do speak of an Assyrian, the Assyrian, as either the false prophet or the Antichrist of the last days of this age. And Nimrod is a strong man. He and his boss, who is a friend of his, who's a former Mossad agent as well, have been buying up water rights, dams in surrounding countries, and in South America, energy rights for oil and gas. And they bought up Channel 10, controlled Channel 10 in Israel for media. It's a huge conglomerate of power structure. And when the United States falls, the global leadership will go back to Europe and possibly some Israeli involvement in that. Since this guy is so kind of anti-everything that Israel should stand for, I think that he could very easily act against Israel, in favor of a global message or a global structure that he and his boss are aiming toward. I mean, they've been getting water rights in Turkey and, to the Euphrates. I mean, all these things are prophetic things that you see mentioned, in the Bible about what would happen and who the control would go to in the last days. Now, I could be wrong. There may be a younger, brighter fellow that comes on the scene, but at the moment, this guy's name, Nimrod Novik, is like the grapevine that entwines and captures, and his name is Assyrian after the first rebel named Nimrod in the Old Testament. So it all kind of adds together that he might be a front runner. Certainly, his manner, his knowledge, his personality would be strong, would favor force to get things done. And that's what Daniel says. He will be a God of forces, strength, that supports the New World Order. And so the false God, the Satan of the Bible, the alien posing as a God, will give technology and power to this leader so he can run by force the global government. And he'll overthrow many of the strongholds of the nations that would resist him at that time with this super technology he's got from the quote-unquote alien God, which Daniel does call him an alien God. They're just, I'm not going to be pedantic about it, but certainly I've been watching him for a long time, and he's certainly been doing what I would expect him to do if he were going to be the leader of this New World Order. He's still got to do something miraculous. He's got to pull a rabbit out of the hat to solve our energy problems, our geophysical changes problems, our threat of nuclear war. He's got to initiate or endorse a peace treaty in the Middle East for a 7-year period. And Nimrod Novak has been involved in that, in the Oslo Accords. He was part of that. And if anybody's going to make a peace treaty in the Middle East, they've got to live there, know there, be born there, and have it in their blood about how to bring a peaceful negotiation between parties that have been warring for over 3,000 years over who owned the land. So just bear that in mind.
We will, Stan. Stan, as we end this discussion, we wanted to ask you one final question from Gemini.
It seems like the earth changes are now upon us from the sun. As we live through these next few years, what is the most important thing you would like to end with for those listening to this show?
Well, obviously we're in for some rather trying times in just our food chain and the weather. I do believe we're going to have a growing shortage of fresh water supplies and with adequate food. 80% to 90% of the world at the moment subsists on a lot less, maybe 30 times less than you and I do here in the Western world. We don't have to worry about what we eat or how much we get to eat. It's like what flavor, how many of, and how many calories, and oh gosh, this kind of stuff. So on a global basis, we're looking at famine, and that's going to tax our resources here in this country and in Europe and various other producers of the global food basket at the moment. So I'm suggesting that people do two things. They prepare physically with freeze-dried food and medicines and defense for their homes, and they try to develop community with their neighbors and family so that they can act together in wherever they are to survive what is coming, and that they have water storage and water purification techniques like chlorine, powdered, or Clorox without all the detergent and stuff in it. And that's physically preparing, and Holly talks about that in her book, the Dare to Prepare book. The 69 chapters of very good information on all sorts of things you can do to get prepared for the changes that are underway now and are going to get much more dramatic as the next decade ensues. That's physically preparing. I'm a firm believer that we will all die eventually, and that in that process we leave our bodies, but we exist after that. I've had the out-of-body experience. I know we do exist outside this body. So I say to people, the most important thing, other than physical preparation, it supersedes that, is your spiritual relationship with our Creator. That is the most important issue to get straight. And, of course, I'm a Judeo-Christian myself, Messianic believer, so I say Jesus is our doorway, and I accept that, and I encourage people to look into that. It's a gift to take that step that lets you be saved into the next life, whatever that form takes. So that's the two most important things that I put out to people as we go into the end of this age, at the beginning of that 1,000-year millennium.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's been a pleasure. I hope it's been enjoyable for you as it has been for us. If not, bad luck, mate. So Fred Hoyle, the controversial English astronomer and mathematician, said, "I don't see the logic of rejecting data just because they seem incredible. Stan, you exhibit the statement to a T. a logical man with an openness to investigate and understand the incredible. On behalf of Fox and all the members of the WebBot Forum, we thank you. May you have many good pies to come.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.